Okay, so we're going to get started with exercise 203, which is a bit of a continuation of 2D drawing, and then we're also going to do some of our first three-dimensional work today. So I'm just going to dive right in and work on it. I did remember this semester, or this class, to have my little floating yellow circle so you see where my mouse is a little bit easier, and I have the little bar at the bottom that's supposed to show what I type. I'm trying to make it easier for you guys to see what I do. If it's annoying, tell me. If you think it's good, tell me later, and we're going to try it out and see what happens. It crashed the last time I tried to do it, so it might crash again. I don't know. But I'm just trying to work through and make this as easy for you guys to follow along with as you can. So first thing I did today for exercise 203 is I went ahead and I opened the file that I created last class, the floor plan, which, having looked at a lot of your computers, you already have open. As we move forward, I'm going to go ahead and just save this as a new version and then keep working. Does it really matter today? No, you could just build right on top of it. We're not going to need the old one again. But in case you find that it didn't really turn out the way you wanted it to, maybe you want to jump back. It's a good habit to get in as we get forward. So what I did was I went to File and then Save As and just changed the name. And I added, for me, the spring of 2019 semester. And that leaves me with my floor plan, and I'm ready to start working with this. So first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to, down at the bottom here, go ahead and draw the south elevation of this building. It's pretty simple, and I don't need you to focus on making it look perfect. We just need some basic stuff. So as I start to set that out, I would come down here. Remember, I'm going to turn on my object snaps. So I'll click the button for OSnap, and then I'll go ahead and turn on end, mid, and perp as my three main ones that primarily live turned on. So end, mid, and perp are on, and I can go ahead and I can come down. I'll use smart tracking, come down here a bit, and then I'll start drawing the bottom elevation. So there it's snapping to perpendicular. Let's assume for right now that my walls are 8 feet tall. We'll come over at 8 feet, and I'll come down. There's my 8 feet. I would continue with this part of the building. We'd come over here to right there, and to right there. I'm not overly worried about putting a roof on or anything fancy. We're just doing really basic stuff. So next thing would be those windows. I'm going to need those windows, so I'd come down here, and I'm just actually going to give myself a big line as kind of a guide of where this window is going to go. So we'll come down like that, and my window is going to fall on this wall right in here. Let's do a standard head height of 6'8". Let me trim those pieces off before I get started here. So I'll go ahead and use the trim command. Remember, it's available over here on the left side by clicking on this button, which is trim. I could type in trim. I could also go up to the edit menu and select trim from the edit menu. There it is. First thing that Rhino is going to ask me is to select the cutting objects. The cutting object would be that for this. I'll go ahead and press enter, and I'll get rid of these pieces that are a little bit longer. I'll press enter when I'm finished. There we go. And that just shortens those up. I can now use those as a bit of a guide. So I could come down here, or actually let me start at the bottom, and I'm going to move up 6'8", which is the standard height of a door and or a window. Oops. Try that one more time. Again, I'm using smart tracking, so I hover over that first point, move my mouse vertically without clicking anything, type 6'8", and apparently I didn't do an 8-foot tall wall. So let's figure out what I did wrong there. I'm going to type a command called distance to see how tall I made that wall. Yeah, 55.25 inches, not 8 feet. So sometimes you make mistakes. Even I make mistakes, right? So this is an example of where we could actually use a scale command. There are 3 different types of scale that are built into Rhino. If you go to the transform menu and you move down to scale, you'll see that there's a scale 3D, a scale 2D, and a scale 1D. They all do different things. Scale 3D is essentially scale in all directions at once. Scale in 1D is scale in only one direction at a time. So I'm going to show you each of those three as we go forward here, just so you can I can illustrate the point. Scale 3D, in this context, we're doing a flat drawing, so 3D and 2D are the same because I have nothing in 3D to scale. So I'll just illustrate scale 2D. In that sense, select objects to scale. It would be my building here. And when I pressed enter, my origin point would be right here. My scale factor or first reference point would be my height. And you see that the whole building grows in that context. If, however, I use scale 1D, so that would be transform scale 1D. I could also just type in scale 1D. And I select those same objects, enter, same base point, and then the height. It's only going to scale it in one direction. So this is a great command, something that's not available in AutoCAD. Difference between Rhino and AutoCAD, and that'll allow me to change this wall to actually be 8 feet, like that, the way it was supposed to be. I can then move on and do the bottom of my my window here. So we'll maybe go up by, I don't know, it's a kitchen, so we'll do 42 inches. And I'll come across, snap to perpendicular, and I now have the basic outline of this particular window. Now that I have that, I'd like to just connect these corners so that I don't have these long lines anymore. It's a perfect opportunity to use the fillet command with a 0 radius that I showed you last class. So I could go up under, I always forget where it is because I always type it. Yeah, there it is. It's under curve and then fillet curves, or I could just type in fillet. Oops, hold on. There we go. Fillet, enter. I want to make sure that my radius right here is set to 0. So I'll type in 0 followed by enter. And then I'll select the first curve and the second curve, and those meet at a nice corner. By the way, in Rhino, when you're done with a command, if you right-click, you will repeat the last command. So I'm back into fillet, and I can pick this line and this line. My radius is still 0. Once again, I'll right-click to repeat the last command, there and there. I'll right-click one more time, there and there. And it gets down to just this particular window. These are still separate line segments, and I'd like those line segments to become one closed joined polyline. So I will select all of those, and I'll go ahead and either go up to the Edit menu and choose Join, press Control-J, or just type Join. I'll look at my command line to confirm that it worked correctly. 4 curves joined into one closed curve. That's exactly what I wanted. That's a nice closed curve now. Now, if I was really working on this building elevation, I'd spend a bunch of time embellishing my window. But the truth is that the likelihood of us really using that is not that high. We'll build a window and stick it in separately as a block reference. We'll get to that a little bit later on in the class. So all I really need to know is where's the hole going to be. That's the hole that it's going to cut for my window. That's good enough for my building elevation. I have that window, but I need the second window right here. So once again, I can use my copy just like last class where I took this window. I go up to Transform, Copy. It's going to ask a point to copy from. Remember, I'll use my smart tracking. The windows are 6 inches apart. I'll pick a point on the left side here. Move my mouse to the left to get that smart tracking line. Type in 6 inches. I haven't clicked yet. I'll press Enter, and I'll come over to right there. And that gives me those 2 windows. Turns out that I didn't actually draw the windows here, but I would need to draw those. So bear with me for just a second while I draw in those windows. I'm starting with a line at the very center of this window. I'll offset that line. I'm going to do a distance of 3 inches. I'm going to do both sides so that I get the 6 inches in the middle of my window. When I'm done, notice that my command still keeps that initial curve selected. This is one of the things that Rhino does, is it doesn't eliminate selections, which would allow me to just press the delete key. So it speeds up. As you work through Rhino, you'll learn these kinds of things. So let me go back to where I had that first line. When I do this and I do offset, distance 3, both sides, B for both sides, I select my curve, I do that, and of course this time it doesn't do it. And it's supposed to keep that selected, and I press the delete key. So it's an efficient way of getting through my selection. Then I'll go back and do an offset again. Remember, it's under curve, offset, offset curves. Or I could type offset. Curve to offsets. First thing is I need a distance. My distance this time is going to be 48, or 4 feet. Bless you. I'll pick my curve. I'm not doing both sides this time, just one side. And there it is. I'll right-click to repeat that command. So once again, I'm back to offset. My distance is still set at 4 feet. I'll pick this curve and offset to that side. Just to delineate that it's a window, I'll go ahead and draw a line across the center here. I'll press Enter to finish. Right-click one more time and draw a line from there to there. Could I spend more time doing that? Absolutely. Do I need to for this exercise? No. It's good enough. But I do need to draw the windows when they show up down over here. So I'll do the same thing. I'm going to use my polyline. I'll start at each window, and I'll come down and I'll draw a line segment. Actually, it would be better to use smart tracking. I'll come down from that line until I intersect. Oh, didn't quite do it. There it is. Right-click to repeat. There it is. The head height will be the same, so I'll just draw a line straight across. The base height is probably a little bit different because this would theoretically be in a bedroom, so I might have the windows be a little bit shorter. I don't know, let's go 2 feet off the ground. Like that. And so I have a lot of overlapping lines. I need to clean them all up. So I can do that using trim, or I can do that using fillet. The outer corners will work nice with a fillet, but if I'm doing a fillet, if I can type, if I did the outer corners, that's great. But if I did it on the inner here, I'd lose the line for right there, and I'd have to draw it over again. So that would be a good opportunity for a trim instead. So I'll do trim. Remember, it's available under Edit and then Trim. Or I could type in, or I could click the button for Trim. Select cutting objects. I'm going to select from right to left so that all of those objects are selected. I'll go ahead and press Enter, and then I could go through and clean up this shape all the way along. Like that. I get that all nice and clean. I'll go ahead and press Enter. I still want these objects to be joined. So I'll select the first window, go up to the Edit menu and type Join. Or I could just type in Join. This time I'll type in Join, followed by Enter. And I'll select those four curves joined into one closed curve. That's what I'm looking for. So I now have my elevation with my 4 window holes ready. So one of the things about Rhino and about drawing in 3D is that we end up with a lot of objects and a lot of things to keep track of. And it's very important for us to get used to assigning objects to layers, because long term we're going to want to divide our objects into layers. We're also going to want to typically assign materials by layer. So getting in the habit of working with the layers menu is a really good thing. So I'm going to, on the right side over here, I'm going to click on the layers palette, which looks like kind of a red, white, and blue pie. And when I click on that, you'll see that we have a default set of layers. My guess is that your default set of layers should look similar to mine. They may have colors assigned to them. They might not. Depends on the computer image as they're set up. I have a default. I have layer 2, 3, 4. Oops, I have 2, 3, 6, and 7. Go figure. You may have 1, 2, 3, and 4. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. We can work with these layers. So let's go ahead and rename one of the layers. I'll take layer 2 here. I'm going to double click on it. I get my text cursor, and I'll change layer 2 to be called floor plan. So unlike AutoCAD, I don't think what your naming conventions are is particularly important. It's basically in Rhino, it's whatever seems to work. So floor plan, that works just fine. I want to assign my building's floor plan to the floor plan layer. How do I do that? Well, I'm going to select the objects. So in this case, I went from left to right, completely containing the objects. There's my floor plan. With those objects selected, I'll come over to my layer palette. I'll right-click on the layer that I want them to go to. So in this case, the floor plan layer, I'll right-click. And in the context menu that appears, there's an option to change object layer. And so I'll go ahead and change object layer. And now these objects are on the floor plan layer. I can confirm that they're on the floor plan layer by simply turning off the floor plan layer with the light bulb. When I turn that off, my objects go away. That's good. They're all on the floor plan layer. I'll do this again with layer 3 here. I'll double click. I'll take layer 3 and we'll call it south elevation. There it is. I will select my elevation. There's my elevation. I'll come over to the south elevation layer. I'll right click and I'll say change object layer. I'll confirm by turning off the south elevation. Yep, that's now changed onto that layer. So the floor plan and the south elevation, those objects have been assigned. If I were to draw something new, it's still going to show up on the default layer. And that's because that is the current active layer. And I can tell that because it's bold and it has a check mark next to it. So whenever a layer has is bold and has a check mark next to it, that's the layer that things that I'm drawing will show up on. Works the same in AutoCAD. So if I were to come over here and start to draw some more, that object there would be on the default layer. I can tell that if I wanted to without changing the layer by just jumping over into the properties. And here is my open curve, and its layer is set as default. So I don't need that right now. We'll go ahead and delete that. I'll just press the delete key, and there we go. So I've assigned floor plan, and I've assigned south elevation. Rhino also has the ability, which I think is a really good move, given that your end project will probably have somewhere between 100 and 1,000 layers when we get to the final in this class. That's very normal. Given that, how you organize your layers starts to become very important. And Rhino allows us to have nested layers. And so what I can do is I can take layer 6, for example, and I can rename it, and I could call this 2D drawings. I'll press enter to finish. And I can take the floor plan and the south elevation. I've selected them both by holding down the shift key and selecting on them. And I can drag those to the 2D drawings layer. And when I drag those to the 2D drawings layer, I now have a 2D drawings, and then these floor and south elevation, the floor plan and south elevations, are sublayers from the 2D drawings layer. This gives us a little bit finer control. I could turn off just the floor plan, I could turn off just the south elevation, or I could turn off all the 2D drawings by turning off the main layer itself, in which case they all go away. So getting in the habit of really thinking about your layer structure can help you long term by setting these up and really staying organized. In the beginning, like today, does it really matter that your layers are perfect? No. But as you move forward, you're going to start to find that the more structure and organization you have to your layers, the easier it's going to be to figure out what's actually in your file. So I have my 2D drawing layers set up. I'm going to take layer 7 here. I'll double click on that, and I'll just call that 3D. I'm going to make the 3D layer current by double clicking on 3D, and it's now the current layer. I should also point out that all of my layers are set as black. Yours may or may not be black. If your layers have a color assigned to them, for example, the floor plan here, if it had a color assigned to it, like red, it would show up as red in my drawing. The colors don't reflect it. They're not important long term. If it helps you to have lots of colors, you can assign lots of colors. If you like to work all in black, you can leave it all in black. It's really a personal preference. The one thing I will caution you against is to not make any layer yellow. It'll let you make a layer yellow. The problem is, if I were to make the floor plan layer yellow, there it is, and I were to select this layer, guess what? They're both yellow. So how do I know what is selected and what's not selected? So stay away from a yellow layer because you'll get confused as opposed to with which layer is actually selected. So I'll take that floor plan layer. It can go back to red for right now. That's fine. A couple other things about layers. If you don't want to accidentally move or change an object on a layer, you could choose to lock the layer. So I could take floor plan here, and I could lock the floor plan. it will still let me select objects, excuse me, it won't let me select objects, but it will still let me snap to corners. So I can still snap to corners, but I can't actually change the objects. So I'm going to go ahead and keep that unlocked for right now. And we're going to move on into the next piece of this puzzle. So I've done part 2, and I've assigned the layers correctly. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to switch out of the top view. So we've been working in 2D. We're about to transition into working in 3 dimensions. So I'll double-click on the viewport name where it says top here. I'll double-click. It gets me out of the top view, and I'm going to double-click on the word perspective, which is the perspective viewport, which is now going to let me see my objects in 3 dimensions. Remember, in terms of navigation, if I want to orbit, I'm going to right-click to orbit. It's different than SketchUp, which is middle mouse to orbit. I'm going to right-click to orbit in Rhino. There it is. And what I'd like to have happen is I'd like this elevation to stand up on end. Rather than being flat on the ground, I'd like it to stand up on end. I'm going to use the rotate command, but it's not the simple rotate. It's actually a rotate 3 dimensions. So we're not just rotating around the ground anymore. We're going to try to get this to stand up. It's available under the transform menu. It's called rotate 3D. Alternatively, I could type in rotate 3D, and I'd get to the same place. So rotate 3D is a little bit different than a regular rotate. First thing, select objects to rotate. All right, well, that's pretty easy. I'll select those objects. Notice that when I made that selection, I moved, or I orbited slightly to make my selection easier. So if I went and did the rotate 3D, and I didn't do that orbit, and I went to try to select my objects, I'd end up selecting other things. So I made my life a little bit easier by doing that rotate, or the orbits, excuse me, before I made my selection, which allows me to make just that as a selection. So don't be afraid to orbit as you're working. So we'll go back up, rotate 3D. Then it's going to ask me for the start of the rotation axis. And this is where people tend to get a little bit confused about this type of rotation. So the start of rotation axis, this is the line around where you want to rotate. So in this case, I want this elevation to stand up on end. So the line around which I want to rotate would be the bottom of this elevation right there. So I start my rotation axis on this corner, and I end my rotation axis on that corner. So I'm essentially starting out with a line. Then I get angle or first reference point. So we're going to snap to a reference point, which would be that reference point right there. It'd be going up one side. There it is. I'll click. This then allows me to fold or pull up the elevation view so that it's starting to stand up. You can see how that's happening. It's not jumping anywhere because I don't have my ortho turned on. So if I turn ortho on, it's going to jump to 90 degrees. There it is, standing up perfectly. Alternatively, if you don't have ortho turned on, if you hold down the shift key on the keyboard, it will jump to be perfectly 90 degrees. Some people prefer to live with ortho on. Other people prefer to live with ortho off, but hold down shift when they want it to jump to 90 degrees. Either way will get you there. Just make sure you keep holding down while you click. Don't let go at the last second and cause your object to move. So there it is in 3 dimensions. So one more time. I'm going to go up to transform and then rotate 3D, or type in rotate 3D. I'm going to select the objects to rotate. I'm going to orbit a little bit to make my selection easier. There it is. Oops, I accidentally selected that window. Remember, I can hold down the control key on the keyboard and deselect that window. When I'm done, press enter. Go. Start of rotation axis. It's going to be along the bottom. So I'll go from here to right there. Angle or first reference point, my angle is going to be right up that wall. And then I'll move my mouse to get my rotation. I'll hold down shift, or I'll turn ortho on and have that stand straight up. Yeah. You're still in the top view. So double click where it says top in the left corner, the viewport. It's kind of gray. Double click that, and then double click on where it says perspective. And that'll get you into the three-dimensional view so you can see this happen. So now that I have that standing up, that's a good thing. It's time to actually create some three-dimensional objects. So my 3D layer is the current layer. I'm going to work from my top layer, or my floor plan right here. I already have my floor plan walls joined together. So I have this wall that's joined together, and I have this wall that's joined together. If your wall is not a closed polyline, if, for example, like that, you have individual lines here, before you do this extrusion, go ahead and select all of them. I'm holding down Shift as I select and working my way around. And go up to Edit and then Join, or type Join. You want to make sure that all of your curves are joined into one closed curve. One of the mistakes I see people make is they do this. So I'll take this curve and I'll work my way around. Like that. I'll go ahead and type join. 10 curves joined into one closed curve and one open curve. Sometimes you'll get curves joined into one open curve, and that's it. That will long-term play problems with our extrusions. So just make sure that your curves end up being closed. If you have trouble getting to a closed curve, explode your curve, go through and manually select, because you'll be able to see where the overlap happened, and then correct the overlap before you move forward. So that was my extra piece, I think. Oh, that was too. That's now a nice closed curve. That's a nice closed curve. But I do want this curve to end up back on the floor plan layer. I'll right-click on floor plan and say Change Object Layer. And it's back to being on its correct layer. So it's time to do my extrusion. I'm going to select the first curve here. And I'm going to go up to my surface menu, not the curve menu. I'll jump over a menu, surface, and I'm going to go to extrude curve straight. I could also type in the extrudecrv command, which is going to do the same thing. So I'm going to start making this a three-dimensional object. A couple things about the extrusion here. Obviously, I'm going to type in how far. But let's look at the options. I have direction. I have both sides, just like an offset, so it could extrude both directions. Next thing here is solid. Do I want this to be solid or not? Right now it's set for solid no, so the shape that I create is not going to have a top and a bottom on it. So I do want it to have a top and a bottom, so extrude curve. If I choose solid, it's now going to have a top and a bottom when I create the shape. So that's good. So solid should be set to yes. Then I have delete input set to no. Sometimes when you're modeling, you have something that you're going to extrude, but you don't want to keep the original curve anymore. You want to get rid of that original curve. You can choose to delete it as part of this process. It's less common with a curve. It's more common with a surface, where you'd want to delete the input surface because you can also extrude a surface. So we'll get to that. For right now, I'll leave delete input set to no. And the other options here are fine as their defaults. So now that I have the options set, I need to type in my value. So it would be 8 feet. So I can type in 8 feet, followed by enter. The alternative would be to snap to this corner of the elevation, because I already have the 8 feet there as well. So you'll see that it is a solid object as I'm looking at it. If you're not seeing yours as a solid object, it may be the way that your view is set up. We'll come over to perspective, click on the little triangle next to perspective, and we have different view styles here. So we have a wireframe style, where we're seeing just wires. We have a shaded style. We have a rendered style. We don't have any renderings yet, so don't worry about that. We have a ghosted style, where we can kind of see through the object. We have an X-ray style, where we can see even more through the object. And then there's a few other ones, like the artistic style. Truth be told, I don't think I ever use those styles. It's kind of SketchUp-y. Right? Pen would be a SketchUp-y style. Anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and jump back to my shaded style. This is the most common style that you're going to be working with. And so we'll go ahead and choose that. and I'm going to do the extrusion of this half of my building. So once again, I'll go up to my surface menu. I'll choose Extrude Curve Straight, or type in Extrude CRV. There's my extrusion starting to happen. I've got my distance already set. Both sides are no. Solid. Oh, yes, we do want solid. Delete input, no. OK, I'm good. And this time I can actually just snap to here, or I could snap to here, and I get to the same end result. So go ahead and click on that. And I now have the beginnings of my building where I've done my extrusion. So that's extruding. The next thing that I'm going to talk through is a command called project. And the project command is one of, if I had to pick 2 or 3 of the most valuable commands available in Rhino, project would be one of those 2 or 3. It's one of the things that separates Rhino from all the other 3D programs. So projecting, essentially what I can do is I can take a curve, so let's say this curve here, and I can tell Rhino, throw that curve straight out until it intersects this surface, and then it intersects this surface over here. So throw that curve across these surfaces and make copies as it does that. So to do it, we need to be able to tell Rhino a couple things. Obviously the curve and the surface, but we need to be able to tell Rhino which direction do we want it to throw. And we do that by using our views. And this is where people get confused as the projections start to happen. So we need to be in a view that is exactly perpendicular, or parallel depending on how you look at it, with where we want it to go. So if I switch to the front view, for example, here, I want to take this curve and I want it to punch all the way through the building in a straight line as I'm looking. Does that make sense? So I've switched into the front view, and I'm going to initiate the command and actually do this work in the front view. So I haven't made this full size. I haven't kept working in the perspective view. I'm going to work specifically in the front view. So I click on front, so it's the active view, and I'll go ahead and start the project command. I'll do this several times, so if you get a little bit lost, don't worry. We're going to go ahead and go to the curve menu, and we're going to come down to curve from objects, and we're going to choose the first one, which is project. You could also just type in project. Select curves and points to project. So I want to project this curve right here. I'll go ahead and press enter. You could do it for more than one curve, but I'm going to do it slowly as we go through this. So I've gone ahead and I've selected the curve. Then it says select surfaces and polysurfaces and meshes to project onto. So this is the surface that you want to actually project onto. So I'll go ahead and select the surface. There it is. This surface over here doesn't intersect my curve at all, so I'm not going to worry about picking it. I'm going to focus just on this first one here. So I've selected the surface. Notice I've done both of those selections in the front view, not in one of the other views, in the front view only. When I'm done, I'll go ahead and press enter. There it is. And you see that it took that curve and it projected it out to intersect here and projected it out to intersect right there. So let me repeat it again. I'll do it with this window here. So we'll start by going up to curve, curve from objects, project. First one would be this curve. Select curves and points to project. I'll press enter. Select surfaces, polysurfaces, and meshes to project onto. This time it will be on this side, so I'll click on this building here. I'll go ahead and press enter, and it will take that curve and project it out to where it intersects here and here. So I can continue on. I'll do it one more time with this curve right there. We'll go up to curve, curve from objects, project. Select curves and points to project. There's my curve. I'll go ahead and press enter. Select surfaces and polysurface to project onto. I'll select right there. And I'll go ahead and press enter. And it creates my second set. So I'm using that flat elevation to draw these and then ultimately project them out to my building. It's much easier than drawing on the face of the building itself. Technically that's possible, but we haven't gotten to the point where we change our plane, our drawing plane. We'll do that a little bit later on in the class. This is a much faster way of doing it at your skill level. So I've thrown these out to my building. Now this last one right here, when I go to do that projection, we'll go to curve, curve from objects, project. And we're going to take that curve and project it onto this surface again. I'll go ahead and press enter, and it projects. But it turned out great here, but over here I just got part of a line, part of a window. It's not where I wanted it to be. So I'm going to go ahead and just select that and press the delete key to get rid of that. So sometimes you end up with artifacts, things that you didn't really want. You'll just have to go in and delete those a little bit later on. Do these have to be closed polylines? No. You could project individual curves without a problem. It's just a lot easier later on to work with a closed curve as we continue to work. So I've done my projections. Next thing that I need to do, we could actually turn off my floor plans and my south elevations. I need to actually cut these through the building so that they become holes for my windows. This is one place where SketchUp is rather convenient. You guys in SketchUp would just use push-pull and push your way through the building. Rhino takes a little bit more work, and this is the one area that I think it takes a little bit of extra. We have two options. The first option, we can use trim. So I could select my curve. I could type trim. Well, let me do it in the other order. I could type trim, select my cutting object. There would be my cutting object. Press enter, and then go ahead and trim a hole into my building. I could then flip around to the inside of my object. I could select my curve, type trim, and click on the inside of the object, and lo and behold, I would get a hole through my object. Notice, however, that it's solid it's hollow inside. So I still need to do a little bit of fine-tuning here to fill that in. So I would go ahead and I would select this curve. Let me hit escape to get out of that command. I'll select this curve, hold down shift, select that curve. Oops. Let's try that one more time. This curve plus this curve. And then I'll go up to my surface, loft. The defaults are fine here. I'll press enter, and it will then fill in what I just cut through. So it's not hollow anymore. That's one option. The other option, as long as you did the project, and as long as this is a closed polyline, I can use a command called make hole. And it's as simple as typing make hole, or it's available under my Boolean operations menu. Right here, it's the two spheres that are joining together, and it's right down here, make hole. So with the make hole command selected, it asks me to select planar closed curves. So that's important, planar closed curves. That's what I have right there. When I'm done, I'll go ahead and press enter. Then it says select a surface or polysurface. I'll select my wall. There it is. Then it says depth point. Press enter to cut through the objects. So I have two options here. I could say, oh, you know what? I just wanted this to be a little bit of a recess. So I could say, let's go 3 inches. And it would cut into my object by 3 inches. Or, when I do make hole, select the object, select the surface, there it is. Enter to cut through the object. Press enter, and it's going to cut right through my object for me. The advantage here of using make hole is that it actually built the insides for me, so I didn't have to do a loft. Sometimes you'll run across a surface where it just won't make the hole correctly. No matter how many times you try, it won't work. In that case, you're kind of stuck using trim and filling it in yourself. It happens. I'm going to move over to these windows here. Same thing, make hole. There's my surface. There's my curve. There's my surface. If I went past where the line is, or where the wall thickness is, let's say I did 1 foot, for example, it would still cut through. So you can always overestimate if you want. So I'll go back. I'll do this one with a make hole. There's my polysurface, 1 extra enter, and it cuts through nicely. Oh, looks like it cut through all the way on the other side. Missed that one, didn't know that it did that. See, even I learn something new every day. So if I didn't want it to punch through that backside, instead of pressing enter, So I'll go back to here, make hole, polysurface there. I would specify the depth. So in this case, I would specify the 6. I would either type in 6 inches or snap to the back side of the wall, and it would only do that. It was the fact that when I did it, that's the same polysurface, and when I pressed enter, it went ahead and went through both. Okay, that's actually pretty cool. So you learn something new every day. The alternative, one more time, just for practice, would be to select the curve, and I could actually select them both, there and there. I'm holding down Shift, and then using trim, enter, clicking in the center to trim out where those two would be. Press enter one more time to finish the trim command, and then go into the loft command, which would be under surface and then loft, or you could type loft. I'll press enter. The options here are fine. I'll press enter one more time, and that then gives me the same end result. So there's always multiple ways of doing the same thing. So my goal for you today is to practice each of these skills. There's a reason. Oh, there you go. See, I made a mistake. When I did this make hole, it made that piece. So just be aware that those kinds of things can happen if I pressed enter. It would have been fine on this scenario there, but not under this one because it cut out part of that door. So what I want you to do is I want you to practice with the rotate 3D today. That's important. I want you to practice with project so that you really feel like you understand how project works. And I want you to practice with the make hole command and the trim command. So do one window with trim, do one trim plus loft, do another window with the make hole so that you feel comfortable with all of those commands. When you're done working with this, you could keep going if you want. You could fill in, for example, the tops of the doors. I'd come back to just a rectangular solid here, and we come down and snap to that height. Same thing, I go from here to there, come down to that height. There, come down to that height. I could fill back in that little piece that I accidentally cut out. Like that. That looks pretty good. Don't worry that this is a separate object from this. When we get to materials, I'm going to teach you guys how to flow a material across multiple objects so that you can't tell when you do the renderings. So don't overly stress out about that method. Alternatively, I could extrude this without the doors. I could extrude the wall straight and then choose to make a hole where the doors go. That's an option. Okay, so when you're done, just like today, or just like last class, you need to do a capture, a screen capture. We're not actually doing rendering here. If I did a rendering, there's nothing that says you can't render it, but it's not going to turn out very well because when I render, all I'm going to do is get this. I have no environment. I have no materials assigned. We'll get to that. Instead of doing that, do a capture. So get your view set up here. Come to the viewport name. Click on the triangle next to the viewport name and go to Capture to File. This will allow you to save a JPEG of this particular file. When you're done, make sure you also save the Rhino file itself. So go to File and then Save to save that Rhino file. We will come back to this at a later time and build upon it a little bit more. You can see so far in the class that a lot of this is repetition. I'm asking you to practice to get comfortable with it. The worst thing that you could do is to do it once and say, oh, I got this, and move on. And then in 2 or 3 classes, when I ask you to do a project, you don't remember what a project even is. That's a bad thing, right? There's a reason that I break this down into small pieces, because I really want you proficient with these commands. Project we will use over and over and over again in the semester. It's a standard thing that you really need to know. So today's your time to practice and get used to it. Does it have to look perfect here? No. This is about getting those skills taken care of. Are there any questions? Yeah, Nick.
Can you go through how to raise the walls again?
Yeah, to do the extrusion? Sure. So let me go ahead. I'm going to let me create a new layer. I don't want it to be a sub-layer here. And I'll call this one 3D2. I'll make that active, and that will allow me to turn off my walls. I'll turn back on my floor plans, and now I can go back through the extrusions. So once again, I have a closed curve. And I'll do this one as a non-closed curve so you can see what happens when it doesn't work. So I'll use this one as a closed curve first. This is how you should do it. It's all joined together as one closed curve. I'll go up to my surface menu. I'll come down to extrude curve straight. Alternatively, I could just type in extrude CRV for extrude curve. My extrusion distance, we'll get to that. Both sides, no. Solid, yes. Delete input, no. The rest of these are all fine. I'm going to either type in my extrusion distance or snap to my elevation. I don't have my elevation turned on, so I'll go ahead and type in 8 feet and press enter. And that then makes this set of walls. When I get to this set, if I wasn't completely joined together and I went to extrude this, one, it would be more challenging to select because I'd have to go through and select all of the pieces, like that, for example. But when I went and did the extrude curve, and I went to try to do that extrusion, I can have solid set to yes, and I could snap to right there. But you see it's not making this object solid because it's not a closed curve. So that presents problems down the road because you're going to have to come back and also extrude these other pieces. They're not all going to be part of the same closed polysurface, so it's going to get complicated. So it's better, and good practice, you can see that all of these are individuals right now. It's better long term to take all of these pieces and join them together first. So I'm holding down Shift to make sure that I can select them all. There we go. I'll go ahead and join, and then I'll extrude the curve. So it's up under Surface, Extrude Curve, Straight, Solid set to Yes, and I'll snap to my 8 feet, and that then creates this as a solid object. Any other questions? No? All right, I'll give you guys the rest of the time to work today. Remember, this class spans lunch, so if you need to step out for a little snack or whatever, that's okay. Sitting outside is not the most pleasant tonight, so you can go in the lobby or whatever if you need a little bit of a break. I'll come around and answer any questions. Unless anybody has global ones, we'll move on.